For almost 1,000 years, the legend of Robin Hood and his band of merry men has thrilled audiences. This hero who robbed from the rich and gave to the poor is one of the most enduring stories in all of history. Whether on the radio, the television screen, or at the movies, Robin Hood remains a hero for all ages. Hi, I'm Morgan Freeman, and I starred in one such film myself. Join Serial at Midnight for this, a celebration of the man, the myth, the legend. Coming up, Robin Hood on Serial at Midnight. Guys, what's going on? Welcome to Serial at Midnight, the official YouTube channel of serialatmidnight.com. My name is Heath, and I'm glad you're here. And I also have to give a huge thank you, a shout out to Morgan Freeman for doing the opening narration of this video. What an honor and what a huge get for Serial at Midnight to have the legend Morgan Freeman doing the opening narration. So guys, this is just going to be a celebration of Robin Hood, really. There's a new movie coming out, and it seems like a good idea, a good opportunity to just talk about Robin Hood. I love the character. It's one of my favorite myths, stories in all of fiction, and I just want to talk about it. So I have a collection. I'm going to show you my Robin Hood collection. My movies, Blu-rays, DVDs, things like that. But it's not complete. You know, invariably someone leaves a comment on these videos and they say things like, well, you didn't talk about such and such. Well, no, I didn't, because I don't have that, and I want to be able to show something when I'm talking about it or have a personal history or experience with it. It's not just a list. It's about the interaction, the relationship with these things. So with that being said, this seems like a really good opportunity to start by just telling you my history with Robin Hood. So this was my introduction, really. So I'd seen the Disney movie when I was a kid, but it was this movie that really lit things on fire for me. I did not get to see Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in theaters. My parents decided I was too young. They went to check it out for me. They thought maybe it'd be frightening for me or something. I don't know. But I was allowed to rent this from Blockbuster Video. And so I watched it. I loved it. And I would then go every weekend. It was a routine. It was a ritual. That after school on Friday, my mom would pick me up. We would go to Blockbuster. I would rent a movie, sometimes a video game, like a Super Nintendo game or something like that. And I would check out Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves many times, and I would watch it as many times as I could over the weekend. Sometimes I would watch it back to back. I would finish the movie, rewind it, and start it again. I loved this movie. It was the gateway for me. Batman 1989 was the first movie that I was really just like, whoa, like movies are more than just this thing that you have on. Like Batman is a huge credit to all of this. Like Batman 89 was a big part of that. Dick Tracy in 1990 further caught my imagination. I wrote Dick Tracy fan fiction. We'll talk about it someday. And then 1991, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, just blew the doors off of my mind. And my parents made a deal with me because I was checking it out so many times, so many weekends I was checking this out and just watching it over and over. And they said, well, if you make the AB honor roll, if you get all A's and B's in your classes this quarter or semester, whatever it was, you can buy Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves on VHS. Because this was one of those earlier, back in the 80s and the 90s, not every videotape had a sell-through purchase price. A lot of them were rental-only purchase prices, but for big hits like Home Alone, Batman, Dick Tracy, things like that, you could buy them. They were open to the public everywhere. The pharmacy, the grocery store, like everybody was getting in on this. And so I made the honor roll and I got Dick Tracy and I would watch it over and over. I counted up to like 45 times. Like when you're a kid, you're like, hey man, I've seen Robin Hood and Prince of Thieves like 45 times. How many times have you seen it? Because this weird credibility thing. But I lost count at some point. I have probably seen Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves more than any other movie ever. I still love it. It ignited so many things for me. Action movies, my love of English culture. I'm such an Anglophile. which you guys, if you've been on the channel for a long time, you know, Doctor Who, all the science fiction stuff, BBC sitcoms, things like that. Like, I'm very much an Anglophile. But just, it was also the first movie that really I was interested in, not just the story, but in the production, the actors, the director, the set decorations. I was like, well, what is, like, the castle at the beginning of the movie? I was like, well, what castle is that? Where is that located? It was all that. It was a combination of the movie being really fun for me, but also me being of just the right age for it to hit me just like square in the head. And so this will always be, I credit this as my favorite movie. I don't know that that's technically true at this point, but I have to give so much credit to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because it really is all these movies, like my love of movies, my love of cinema, of storytelling, comics, so many things, I think I can trace to Robin Hood. So with that being said, let's go back to the beginning. Not the very, very beginning, but let's go back to the adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, Basil Rathbone, Claude Rains. This is, by many estimations, considered to be the best Robin Hood movie ever made. I don't know that I can argue. Though I love my Kevin Costner and my Alan Rickman, that movie, you know, it is a product of its time. Whereas something like The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938, I believe, is timeless. It is probably the most swashbuckling, exciting, adventurous version of the story that has ever been put on film. This Blu-ray looks beautiful, and it's loaded with a bunch of stuff, a bunch of special features. It's got 2 documentaries on here, commentary, a Leonard Maltin night at the movies, tons and tons and tons of stuff. This really is an absolute classic, not just for Robin Hood, but just a movie. It's one of the best. It's probably in the top 100 movies of all time, right? I'm not sure, but I have to imagine that it is. This is a fantastic movie. And then we're going to jump ahead a little bit. These are recent acquisitions for me. This is a trio of movies. The Sony distributed these. These are Columbia movies. It's The Bandit of Sherwood Forest. It is Rogues of Sherwood Forest, and Prince of Thieves. You see where they get the Prince of Thieves name? This has been around for a long time. These are movies from the 50s. These are, I don't want to say they're B movies. They're not B movies. I think they're ambitious. They were color films in the 50s, which was not always, you know, studios would reserve color film for their more aspirational, you know, they're really, what their epic movies, you know, things that really benefited from color. And these are all in color. The Bandit of Sherwood Forest has Cornel Wilde in it, which he's a film noir actor, he's a director. But I have to confess, these two I have not watched yet because, like I said, these are recent acquisitions for me. They were put out when the Ridley Scott, Russell Crowe Robin Hood movie was released. Sony distributed these for Columbia because, I guess, tie-in, you know, like, well, let's get some of that money. We have Robin Hood product. Let's make money off of it while we can. These are deep catalog titles for Columbia. But I picked these up. They're out of print. I picked these up in the last month for about $2 a piece. One of them was brand new. The other two, I think they were actually all brand new. I have less than $10 in all 3 of these movies. So I'm excited to get to the other 2 that I haven't seen, but the one that I watched was fantastic. I love studio pictures from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. There's something that we can't, there's a swashbuckling nature to things like this that we can't underestimate. But as I have mentioned repeatedly now, these are out of print, but there is good news because Mill Creek Entertainment has just announced, just a matter of weeks ago, that they're putting these 3 movies as well as 2 other movies out on a package called, I think it's called Robin Hood Origins. It's coming in January, and it's going to be 5 movies, I think on 2 DVDs, but these are so short, you know, they're 72 minutes, 76 minutes, 82 minutes, should be fine. These are all short movies. They're programmers, I would like to say. These were part of a night at the movies. They weren't the only thing you would see at the theater. You'd see these, you'd see a short, you'd probably see another feature before or after this. But they're bringing these 3 back to DVD, as well as, I think it's called The Black Arrow, and a movie that I am excited about called The Sword of Sherwood Forest, which was a Hammer production. Hammer made a Robin Hood. They actually made a few Robin Hood movies, but that was Hammer made Sword of Sherwood Forest. It has Peter Cushing in it, and it has Richard Green reprising his role from the TV series. So this was the TV series that aired from 1955 to 1960. This DVD set, coincidentally, is also released by Mill Creek. Mill Creek is apparently a friend of Robin Hood. And Richard Green, I believe, do not quote me, but I believe that Richard Green, the star of this series, is the only actor to reprise his role in a feature film, which was Hammer's Sword of Sherwood Forest. So we're getting all 5 of those movies in January for a song. It's like, I think it's a $15 retail price, which means that it will be everywhere probably for $10 or under. I'm not sure if it's going to be region locked or not. I think most of their stuff is, but I'm not sure. So I also want to talk about the first Disney Robin Hood. This is I'm not sure what the year of this is, but this is the story of Robin Hood. This is a Disney Movie Club exclusive, or it was. I'm not sure if it still is. I kind of suspect that maybe it is, but I don't know. But it's a Disney Movie Club version of the story of Robin Hood from their Wonderful World of Disney series. This is a whole series of these. These would come on TV. In the 60s and the 70s and even into the 80s. Wonderful World of Disney was appointment television, and this is their take on Robin Hood from the era when Walt was still around. But since we're talking Disney, we do have to talk about the Disney animated Robin Hood, which is really just a fantastic version of Robin Hood. The music and everything, the folksy, dee-dee-dee-dee-doo. Well, I'll spare you. But when I was a kid, I had a puzzle of it was a Robin Hood puzzle from this movie, and it was a kid puzzle, so it was like 8 pieces. It was like maybe a baby puzzle, toddler puzzle, but it was like 8 pieces. But it was all the characters from the Disney Robin Hood movie, and so I've always known these characters. I've always kind of loved them. I associate them, like, it's weird because I associate these characters and this character designs with like smell. There's a smell that I think of when I think about Disney's Robin Hood. That's the way memories work, right? Because there's always triggers and you associate certain memories with smells. And so I even have a smell for Disney's Robin Hood that I can't explain it. I can't describe it. It's a unique smell. But it must have been, maybe it was that puzzle back in the day. I don't know. But it's a shame to me that Disney doesn't do more with this, because I think this is one of their classics. I think a lot of people really like this movie. But it doesn't get a lot of play. It doesn't, like in the parks, there's really not a whole lot of representation for Robin Hood. I get to go there fairly regularly, sometimes once a year, sometimes twice a year. I don't see a lot of Robin Hood in the parks. Now, I know sometimes they'll have special events and they'll bust out a couple of character meet and greets with Robin Hood, Maid Marian, but it's like once or twice a year that they do these things. Is it the Not So Scary Halloween Party? I can't remember, but there's not a lot of Robin Hood representation in the park. And you would think that New Fantasyland or in Disneyland would be like ground zero for some of this stuff, because this is super high fantasy. But that being said, Disney's Robin Hood is great. And then there's, stuff that came out in between then. Robin and Marian it's a solid Robin Hood movie. Sean Connery, basically it's a transitional role for Sean Connery because he was coming out of that leading man thing and going into his elder statesman kind of a position. It was where he was no longer Bond and he was becoming like a distinguished gentleman, where he was, an elder actor. Stopped wearing the toupees and stuff and just embraced his aging. And that movie, Robin and Marian, 1976, is really about Robin Hood aging and living past his prime and dealing with old age and like the same struggles and all that stuff. It's interesting. I have written about it. If you want to know more about my thoughts about Robin and Marian, I did a back to 1976 column on that. I will link to that in the description of the video. It's a heavy movie, and I don't really want heavy from my Robin Hood, but I can't deny the power of that movie. It's got Robert Shaw in it from Jaws, Quint from Jaws, and Bond as well. It's kind of a reunion of Bond. And it's also got Audrey Hepburn in it. So it's a good movie, but it's heavy. Oh, Lord, is it heavy. So let's just jump ahead. There was an 80s series for in Britain. I'm not sure what channel. Was it ITV? Don't quote me. But there's a 2-season series. I do not have that on DVD or Blu-ray. I need to get it. I know. Let's talk more about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because it's my favorite, you guys. This is the one that I credit for everything. But I have to say that I'm irritated that the only Blu-ray we have of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves is this extended edition. Excuse me, extended edition. It's not a director's cut. It's not like this was the cut that the director made and he just didn't get a chance to bring in the product that he wanted. This is an extended cut. Now, I will say it's about 12 minutes of added footage, and it wasn't in the theatrical cut, those 12 minutes. When I was a kid, obviously, when I was loving this movie, I read the novel. I have the novelization both in paperback and in a hardcover, like a book club hardcover. And the novel has the extra scenes that are in the extended edition that weren't in the theatrical version. And I loved that about the book. That was my incentive to reread the book. So I was like, well, it's this thing that I love, but it's more of it. But having said that, I'm a grown man. I've seen a lot of movies. The movie is better without the scenes. The scenes are great. They should be presented as extras, I believe. But I long for the theatrical cut of this movie on Blu-ray. The theatrical cut was on DVD, but it was that old Warner Brothers flipper disc where you'd have to stop the movie, or the movie would stop halfway through. You'd have to get up, turn the disc over like it was a tiny little laser disc. And then when they repressed that on a single disc, or a single double layer disc, they went with the extended cut. So the only way to see the original theatrical cut in the digital era is the flipper disc from 1999, something like that, which is a shame. Here we are, 20 years into this cycle. Blu-ray's been out for over 10, and we don't have the theatrical cut. It's the same thing with Dances with Wolves. Kevin Costner, buddy, what are they doing to your movies? Your theatrical cuts are nowhere to be found. What are we going to do? You got to stand up. You got to stand up and say something about it, K-Cos. But anyway, so I love this movie. I don't necessarily love this version. I think this is a prime candidate for someone coming along and doing an even better special edition version of this. But 1991 was the year of Robin Hood. And when this was in theaters, this was on television, at least in the U.S. So this is Robin. It's just called Robin Hood. It's got Patrick Bergin and Uma Thurman as Robin and Marian. First of all, look at the shaggy haircut and the mustache. Like that screams Robin Hood to me. And this was, in America, I think this came on Fox. I want to say it was Fox. But I think elsewhere, Europe, any Europeans, let me know. You probably remember this. This was a theatrical release, if I'm not incorrect. And I think that as a contrast to this, because this is Hollywood bombast, right? Like, I mean, compared to now, it's not that big of a deal. But at the time, this was like fast action, man. This was like an epic Hollywood blockbuster with the best that Hollywood had to offer. It's Kevin Costner, who was huge at the time. He had just come off of Dances with Wolves. So he was like, he could do anything. It had Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio in it. It had Alan Rickman in it from Die Hard. Like, all these people were at the peak of their game, it seemed like. But there were a lot of Americans in that movie, too. I know Alan Rickman's not American, but it was a very American take of the legend, whereas this does not feel American. It does feel European. It feels very minimalist, very stripped down. It's still heroic, still the same story, but it's got a lot of... it just has it's a little bit of a darker, truer, more medieval tone to me. And I love it. So obviously I do prefer Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, but I love this one so much. And I absolutely watched this on TV when it came on in 1991. It's really good. And if you guys haven't seen it, I don't know the print status of this or not, but Serial at Midnight recommends this movie. And then a couple of years later, because Robin Hood had become so popular again, Mel Brooks took a crack at it with Robin Hood Men in Tights. Now, I don't have the single disc version, the dedicated version of Men in Tights, but I do have this Mel Brooks box set, and Men in Tights is right there. And it's so funny because Carrie Elway is probably now more famous for Saw than anything else. I think Princess Bride has come back around, but I always knew Carrie Elway from Robin Hood Men in Tights and Dave Chappelle. It's just so funny to me because it's so interesting how different generations identify an actor with different roles. And I guess it would be very lucky for an actor to have multi-generational appeal for different people to recognize them and love them for different things. But for me, Cary Elwes, though now he is Wesley, obviously, As You Wish. But when I was younger, I hadn't seen Princess Bride. I didn't see Princess Bride until the late 90s. I think I caught that on VHS back in the day. Renting from Blockbuster. But Men in Tights, I loved Men in Tights. I won't say much about Mel Brooks. I think that his Men in Tights might have been one of the last movies that he made that was watchable. And he did eventually just hang it up, I guess. But 60s and 70s Mel Brooks is just on fire. But Men in Tights is good. It's good. There's some other stuff between that point and kind of where we are now, but I don't have any of it. I don't really... There was the BBC series that came out, the TV series that came out in 2006, 7, somewhere in there. I think they got 4 seasons maybe. And they put the first season out on Blu-ray, but then they didn't put the others out on Blu-ray. So there is a complete series box set of that, but it is DVD. I'll probably just pick it up. I was waiting on a Blu-ray box set, which I guess is not coming. It's kind of a bummer. But that show was really cool. It had a lot of interesting things with color. Flags. It was very, like a music video. Very, very, very music video inspired production there. But I watched. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched a little bit of it and I enjoyed it. But really, we do now have to talk about the Ridley Scott directed Russell Crowe Robin Hood. I don't really know how I feel about this. I think that it is. It's kind of joyless. And I don't really like a Robin Hood that's joyless. And you can argue that, I'll argue the point. He's a hero in this movie. He stops the bad guy. He fights for the people. But it's just done with so much, like, over drama. Oh, it's overly dramatic. It's overly dire. It's, you know what? Where Robin Hood is a story about the people, a man for the people, a folk hero who robs from the rich and gives to the poor and restores justice. This is like Robin Hood at war, where everything is just very serious and important. And I don't know that works for Robin Hood, and maybe it just doesn't work for me. But part of the problem, see, it's coming out. Part of the problem is that, so this was a documentary. They're chasing reality. So this is a DVD that came on the History Channel. It was is executive produced by Ridley Scott. So Ridley Scott's fingerprints are on this, and it is the real Robin Hood. And they try to take, that's the whole thing, is they try to take a historical stance, a historical approach to Robin Hood, with some success, I would say, because we're looking at the Crusades. We're looking at, Ridley Scott had directed Kingdom of Heaven before this, right? And that's a great movie about the Crusades. And, I don't necessarily want a fun, jaunty Crusades adventure because that's a war story. But Robin Hood is supposed to be about hope and about escapism to an extent, because this is talking about how Robin Hood was based on a real historical figure, that there's all these historical records of a real Robin Hood, which all that's true, but there's lots of Robin Hoods. Robin Hood was a name given to certain outlaws. It almost seems like it was a label that was put upon certain outlaws in the books, And so we really don't know. There's not like there's one guy we can trace it to. And I feel like that's kind of what they're trying to do, is be like, well, did you know that he was a real guy? Yeah, he probably was based on a real historical figure. But I think the story, for the most part, has evolved into Renaissance legend. It started as a medieval legend, and then it got into the Romantic era, and it's completely different from anything that it ever was. And I guess Ridley Scott's goal was to strip away all of the fantastical fun out of the story. See, I'm being too cynical about this, maybe, but it does feel cynical. This movie feels cynical to me. It feels very violent. It feels very dark and joyless and merciless. And we've been there for a while with our movies, and I think maybe we're starting to pull out of it a little bit, but for a long time we were in this very angry, dark place. And this is indicative of its time. We will look back on this in 30 years and we'll say, well, that Robin Hood by Ridley Scott absolutely represents where society was at the time. So it is what it is. We take it. We take what we like from it, and we move on. And now there's a new Robin Hood movie headed to theaters, and that's kind of cool because the property will cool off, the story cools off, and then it'll rise up again, and then it gets popular. And it seems to be, it's like Batman. Robin Hood is like Batman. You heard it here first. He seems to be open to multiple interpretations. We can have a dark Batman. We can have a lighter Batman. We can have our gritty Robin Hood. We can have our fun, kid-friendly Robin Hood. Our cartoon Robin Hood. There's several cartoon versions. There's one cartoon version that takes place in space. And I want that show on DVD, but I believe it's out of print. But that's what's so interesting and unique and special about the character. It's one of our great myths. It's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. You could probably expect a King Arthur video like this one to be coming at some point. I won't put a date on it, but that's another enduring myth that I just love so much. So guys, thank you so much. Thanks to Morgan Freeman. Thanks to you guys for hanging out. Thanks to Robin Hood, wherever he is, whoever he is, for giving us the legend and the myth that continues to endure all these years later. Guys, take care. Thank you so much. I will catch you later.